Okay, so we're still on Nun Tes Amud Beis, in the bottom third. We're going to continue on our sugya for just a little bit longer. This fascinating discussion. Last we looked at it, we said that we were talking about Oino's Devarim, and we have the story of Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim, who had differing views on Chumrah and Kula. And just to sum it up, the Torah says Achar Rabban Lahatas, which we had a week ago in Parshas Mishpatim, and therefore, even though the Bas Kol from Shemayim said that the halacha is like Rabbi Eliezer, the response from the Yeshua and others was to the Rabbeinu Shalom, you gave us the ability to make decisions on Rabbim, and if the Rabbim is against Rabbi Eliezer, we don't count the Bas Kol. The Bas Kol isn't, it's b'shamayim, it's not here. So at the end of the day, they ostracized Rabbi Eliezer, and the Gemara tells us how that came about. That Rabbi Akiva came, and he was very gentle with telling him what was going on, and Rabbi Eliezer then sat shiva. He sat down in black, and he accepted it. So that's kind of where, again, the power of what we're going to see Oinos Devarim and how that fits in here. All right, so we're up to the Gemara where the Gemara says that, so Tana, in other words, after the incident with Rabbi Akiva, says the Gemara, Tana, about what, 8 lines maybe from the wide lines. Ach Godel Hoya Be'osa Hayoim. A big event, negative, but a big event happened on that day, the day that Rabbi Eliezer was ostracized. Shebechol Mokom Shenosim Boy Einov, Rabbi Eliezer Nisraf. That wherever Rabbi Eliezer looked, it went up in flames. In other words, the koyach of the negative on Rabbi Eliezer is that
I guess this is where they get for the comic strips of the superheroes with these crazy powers.
Where they shoot out the flames. So again, Rabbi Eliezer didn't. I don't know. It doesn't say that he fought it or anything else. But again, this is through the Rabbeinu Shalom showing his wrath that this should not have happened. So it says wherever he looked, it went up in flames. And you get a lot of this. For Af Rabbi Gamliel Hoya Besfina, Rabbi Gamliel was the Rosh HaKol. So the role he played was that he was the final word. In other words, he had to give the final decision. So Rav Gamliel, and by the way, that was his brother-in-law. So Rav Gamliel was going in a boat. Omar Lov Nafshel Tabo, and a storm came and was going to drown the boat. Omar, so he said, this is only happening because of Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus, because of the deed that we did. Omar al Raglov, so Rav Gamliel stood up, Omar, and he said, Rebbeinu Shalom, Goliv Yadu Lefanecha, it's known to you. I didn't do this for my honor that I had to ostracize Rabbi Eliezer. That's not for me. And I didn't do it for Beis Avi, for my house, for my good name in the house. Only for your honor. Why? There should not be further disputes in Klal Yisrael. Nocha hayom mizapo, and therefore the ocean, the sea that he was in, subsided, and he did not. There was no further damage, no further event. So what we see from this is, and again, it goes to what we said last week, and remember we said that I think it was Rabbi Yeshua, who was it, Rabbi Yeshua maybe, who encountered Eliyahu Navi. and he said, Reb Nosson said to Eliyahu Navi, what's the Rebbeinu Shalom doing with all this? He sees what's unfolding here, and so how is he reacting? So he said, Benavua, he said, Eliyahu Navi said, the Rebbeinu Shalom is smiling because he basically said, I created a situation where you, Basar V'Dam, you human beings, have it over me. In other words, I created the Torah. But one of the things I created was Acharabim Lahatos. So that's what you're doing. You're doing Acharabim Lahatos. And as a result of that, even though I, the Rebbeinu Shalom Kaviyachol, say the halacha is like Rabbi Eliezer, I don't have any control over that. You have the control. You're the rabbin. So when Rav Gamliel said that he did it, Shaloya Machlokes B'Yisrael, that's what he's referring to. He said, we have an established law now. The law is Achri Rabban Lahatos. So if we didn't have that, then it would be all over the lot. Everybody would say, I'm right, and you'd have five poskim on the same thing. You can't have that. So in order for there to be unity in Klal Yisrael, so again, once he said that, to make it clear that it was L'Shem Shemaim, it was not for his own personal honor, then the sea calmed down and he wasn't hurt. Again, it's fascinating stuff in the Agadata, very deep, and what we we learn it on the surface, we understand it, but this is Sisrei Torah. This is really deep down it's easier to learn a Blat Gemara and a Machlekes between Rav and Shmuel than it is to understand what's going on here. So in any event, that's okay. So on this point, we'll go a little further. On this point, Ima Shalom, the Beisid Rabbi Eliezer, Ima Shalom was her name. Ima Shalom was the wife of Rabbi Eliezer, and she was the sister of Rav Gamliel, the Gamliel who was the Rosh that we just talked about. Asad Rabbi Gamliel Hava. So once this thing unfolded, Mahu Maisa ve'elech, from that incident where Rabbi Eliezer was excommunicated from the klal. So loy hoya shofkel Rabbi Eliezer lemepel al ape. This is a very revealing thing. She did not let Rabbi Eliezer say tachnun. The mapel al ape means saying tachnun. She did not let him say the tachnun. Why? Because it's widely known that tachnun is the tefillah that you say to the Rebbeinu Shalom. Basically, from all the tefillahs, this is the tefillah that will sort of seal the fate. That's how important we say tachnun. Really, is kind of like not only do we say tachnun, in many places we try to avoid tachnun, right? There's always an avoidance of tachnun, especially by simcha, even a yortzeit in some cases. So she didn't let him say tachnun. Why? Because she was afraid that if he said tachnun, then his tefillah would go against Rav Gamliel, who was her brother. So she was very concerned, right? Hahu Yoma Reish Yarcha Hava. So, okay, so how can she? I mean, she doesn't go to shul. How is she going to prevent him from saying tachlun? So it's interesting because the Mefarshim explain that she didn't have to do that. She knew he said tachlun only after Shmon Esrei, so she kind of was acha hapargud. She was hiding behind the wall. And when it came to Shmon Esrei, after Shmon Esrei, she prevented him from saying Tachnun. So she didn't have to sort of guard him all day. She knew that he would only say Tachnun twice a day. He would say it in the morning and the afternoon, right after Shmon Esrei. All right, this is so Ima Shalom was very, very careful. Says the Gemara, Hu Yomer. So what happened? Hahu Yomer Reish Yarcha Hava. So now we know that when Rosh Chodesh comes, depending on the circumstance, you either have 1 or 2 days Rosh Chodesh, right? If it's a chaser, then you have like this past month. We just had 2 days Rosh Chodesh because it was a chaser, so we had it on the 30th day of Shvat and on the first day of Adar, 2 days. If it's a Malay, then 30th day of Shvat is a regular day, and Rosh Chodesh is on the first day of Adar. So what happened? Hahu Yomer Reish Yarcha Hava. It was Rosh Chodesh, and the Ichlifla, and she Ima Shalom made a mistake. She didn't realize Bein Mala Elechaser. She didn't realize that she confused the Mala and a Chaser. Well, okay, why is that important? Because on Rosh Chodesh we don't say Tachnun. So if it's a 2 day Rosh Chodesh, you don't say Tachnun. If it's a 1 day Rosh Chodesh, then on the 30th of the month, he would say Tachnun. Okay, so you see what's unfolding here. Um, so she would have made a mistake and not stopped him from saying Tachnun because she confused a Mole and a Chaser. Iked Amre, others say no. Iked Amre also Anya Avava that an Oni came and wanted to collect, and so she got distracted. Afika le rifta, and so she got distracted because she wanted to give him some food. So she wasn't watching what Rabbi Eliezer was doing. Kechita denofal al anpei. So then she saw, notwithstanding whether you say it's one or the other, that he said tachnun. She thought so. In other words, it was a Malay. So 30th you would say tachnun. She didn't realize it. He said tachnun. Amalei. So Ima Shalom said to Rabbi Eliezer, "Kum katlis la'achi." You're killing my brother. She was the sister of Rav Gamliel. You're killing my brother because you're saying Tachnun, and we know that the tefillah of Tachnun is so powerful that it will seal the fate that it's powerful. Okay, Adahochi Nafek Shipura Mibeis Rabbi Gamliel the Shachiv. Now, at that very time, says the Gemara, that there was the proclamation that Rav Gamliel was nifter as this was unfolding. So Omalei, so Rabbi Eliezer said, Mino Yadat, how do you know? How do you know Rav Gamliel was nifter? Amrullah, she said to him, Kach mukubleni mi beis avi abba. It's fascinating. I have a Kabbalah, I have a tradition from my great-grandfather, who was David HaMelech, because she comes from, Rav Gamliel came from the lineage of David HaMelech. So she was the sister. So I have a makubal, I have an understanding from David HaMelech. Kol ha'sha'arim nigolim hutz mishari ano. This is the punchline, that all of the gates, which we said before, when all the gates of the Shemayim are locked up, chutz mishari oino, except for the gate of oino. And so basically what she said here was that the oinos devarim, the way you treated Rabbi Eliezer, meant that his tefillas, when he said tachnun, or his tefillas, were mekubal in mishamayim, and therefore she answered him, that's how I knew that my brother was nifter, because I understood that Rabbi Eliezer, her husband, was slighted, and therefore the Rebbeinu Shalom took umbrage and he protected. So again, for us to understand the power of words, again, that's really what we're talking about here these last few weeks. Is Oinos Devarim has a power even greater than Oino in Mama and in business and everything else, because speech is powerful. And so here you have another example where, as a result of the way they treated him, now the real question that the Rishonim ask in all is, how would they have done this differently? At the end of the day, Acharab Lahatos, they had to not follow Rabbi Eliezer. So there's a taina that maybe they shouldn't have given him kores. They should have dealt with it differently. But the question always arises is if we have an established rule, which we do, right? So how do we take that rule and make sure that everybody understands it? Because remember, Rabbi Gamliel said, I only did this so there shouldn't be machlokes in Klal Yisrael. So on the one hand, you don't want to slight Rabbi Eliezer, but on the other hand, if he insists on his point, it's going to create machlokes within Klal Yisrael. So that's a tough one. I mean, how do you sort of compromise so that you don't you don't go off the deep end, but at the same time you make a very important point that Achrei Rabban Lahatos in this case we have to go with the majority. In any event, that's a very
He knew
difficult.
that. He knew that pasuk.
Of course, he knew
And
it.
it's at some point
He should have relented, right?
he was required to
To
go.
follow it.
Yeah.
No, that's very much the point. Rabbi Eliezer himself should have realized that I am in the minority. But remember, there was a baskoil that said, "Kol halacha." Wherever Rabbi Eliezer has a position, the halacha is like Rabbi Eliezer. So he knew min hashamayim that he was right. Right? The question is, sometimes you have to maybe sacrifice a little bit, even if it's min hashamayim, in order to keep shalom. So look at the importance of shalom in Klal Yisrael. And lahavdil, we see that throughout the generations and even in our time, when there isn't shalom in Klal Yisrael, bad things happen. When there's shalom in Klal Yisrael, then the Rabban Shalom says, Klal Yisrael is together. I'm going to, I'm in. Otherwise, why should I be in if there's a machlokes in Klal Yisrael? Very difficult. This is really a tough topic. But at least on the surface, we see how the Gemara deals with it, and it's very schwer. It's very schwer. That's why, as I said before, when it comes to Agadata and these kinds of stories in the Gemara, you can't delve and clear too much. There, you understand it at one level, and then you move on. Otherwise, you don't really understand what's going on here behind the curtain. Okay. All right, so now a couple more things that the Gemara wants to teach us here before we move on. So we've been talking about Oinos Devarim between members of Klal Yisrael, right? Now, we know that there is a special place in the Rabbi Shalom's, Kaviyachal, the Rabbi Shalom's heart, for the Gerim, V'haftas HaGer. So that says the Gemara, Tana Rabbanan, Amages HaGer, over b'shloisha lavin, someone who commits oinos devarim on a ger, okay, especially a ger, then he is over 3 lavin, v'halochatzo over b'shnayim. And so that's if you do oinos devarim, then they're over 3 lavin, because there's 3 separate psukim in the Torah about not to offend a ger. 3 psukim in the Torah. But if you but if you not verbally abuse him, but you oppress him non-verbally, then there's only 2. So that's the brisa. Says the Gemara, "Ma'ishno mi'oino d'ktuv shloisha lavin." So let's understand. By oino, if you say something, you get 3 lavin. The ksivi shloisha lavin. What are the 3 lavin? V'ger lo yishayneh. You should not, cross a ger. V'chiyoger itcha ger b'atzchenu lo sonu also. Same lashon in a different way. That if a ger lives with you, you shouldn't do wrong. V'lo sogi ish es hamisoy. And you should not wrong your fellow man. V'ger b'chlala misahu. So your fellow man, I mean, we know from other Gemaras, from our discussion, that there are some things that a ger is not included in because he's not part of the parsha of Klal Yisrael. He's a latecomer, so clearly he's a member of Klal Yisrael, but there are things that apply just to a Jew who was born a Jew. So here it says, Veloso ish es amiso. What does amiso mean? It means his fellow man. V'ger b'chlal amisahu, and a ger is included in the lashon amiso. So those are the 3 different categories of why you're over 3 lavin. Because when you say something about a ger, each of those lavin comes to the fore. So frankly, says the Gemara, lo chatzenu nami. So then by oppression, so that's by oinos devarim. But by oppression, when you oppress a convert, without words, but you oppress him, then shloisha kesive. This is the Bryce is asking. There's also three. Lo sachatzenu, right? You shouldn't oppress him. V'gerloi silchotz, another way of saying the same thing that you shouldn't. They shouldn't. Lo sia lo kenoshe. Um, you shouldn't. This has to do with borrowing. That you should not be a creditor, meaning that he owes you money and you're going to oppress him. Right? And then we say v'ger b'chlal hu, and a convert is also included in that halacha that you shouldn't depress. So think about this a minute. And this is very prevalent in the Torah, is that there's a mitzvah for you to lend money to a person who needs it. No question about it. But on the other hand, once you become a creditor, there is a fine line and very delicate line about what you do to get back your money. Because, you're entitled, but at the same time, you can't oppress. So it becomes a very difficult thing. And again, there's a lot of discussion about that, not to lend, to lend. But that's not the point here. The point here is that the ger is included in that three. So the kasha is, how can you say that a ger there are three isurim for oino and only two for when you lochatzenu, when you oppress? We see there's three for oppression too, three psukim. So what does that mean? So ella echad zeh v'echad zeh b'shloisha. So the Gemara says no. Both, whether you do a nors devarim or you press him out, you oppress him, it's all three. There's three in each. So in other words, that's a mistake. Again, the Gemara says it doesn't mean there are three. Okay. Now, Tanya, we learned in the Brisa, Rabbi Lezer HaGadol Omer. This is a different Rabbi Lezer. Rabbi Lezer HaGadol says, "Mipnei ma his hira Torah b'lamed vav mekoymos." Why does the Torah warns us in 36 places in the Torah about a ger? There's 36 places in the Torah where there's a reference to how you deal with a ger. From law b'memvav makomos, and some say 46 places. I counted all the different ones. So why is there so many references to the ger that you have to be careful? So the Gemara says that mitnei sheyasuru ra. And this is very interesting because we say that a ger is kekatan shenola dami, that he's a brand new soul. He's a new person. You can't look back and say, oh, he was this and this. You're not allowed to do that. But here we're saying that the reference is, whether it's 36 or 46, is because his inclinations, his very being is bad. In other words, how do you separate out the inside from the outside? We have this expression, a goy blapt a goy, a goy is a goy. So, but yet you have to give him the benefit of the doubt if it becomes a ger, that he's turned the page and that he's not what he was before. That's why you have to be so careful of haftas a ger. But here the Gemara is telling us that the reason why it says so many times in the Torah that how you have to treat a ger is because, notwithstanding everything that we've said, there is this little seed in a ger that what he was before, it's there, but he's overcoming it. So the point is that it's still there. You didn't eradicate his bad behavior or whatever he did before. You can't throw it up at him. You can't say, oh, you did this and this and this. But we're mindful of the fact that that there was a past that wasn't Kahogan. So it's complicated to understand, because the Haftas Ager is you're not supposed to look beyond where he is. Yet the Torah says in all these 36, 46 times, in order to ensure that that we will overcome this. In other words, the Torah is what he's saying is it isn't just going to happen by itself. Oh, he's a ger, and we embrace him and everything else. There has to be a special effort to overcome the background. That's really what it amounts to.
Excuse
So
me,
Rabbi,
right.
Rabbi, I have a couple questions for you.
yeah,
First, okay, so, but wasn't a ger at Mount Sinai? Didn't they also receive the Torah, even a ger, right? Their soul was supposed to be there to begin with, right?
right. Except that they were there, but they weren't makabel the Torah. In other words, the entire world was there, but only Klal Yisrael said Nasa v'nishma. The others didn't say Nasa v'nishma.
Okay, so now you have all of these mitzvahs not to oppress the ger. Does that count if you didn't know they were a ger?
Say it again.
Is
Does
it
it
all,
what?
does it is it an issue if you didn't know that it was a ger that you were oppressing? I mean, do you have to intentionally oppress a ger in order to have that avera?
Yeah, yes. In other words, if you did it b'shogeg, you bothered somebody. You didn't know he was a ger, but it's not. You can't do it to a Jew either. But
Right.
right. So to a Jew, okay, it's one thing. To a ger, but if you didn't have the kavana, you didn't have the intention really, then it's not the same. You have to have that intention.
So if you oppress a ger, you're twice over, right? You're over for oppressing a Jew and for oppressing a ger.
Essentially, yes, because you're not allowed to oppress a Jew either. But the seriousness of oppressing a ger, which is greater than the seriousness of oppressing a Jew, you may not be over if you didn't intentionally. If again, you intended to oppress, you just didn't know that he was a. What do we say by Shabbos? By Shabbos, we say that you can be Michal Shabbos, but if it's a shogeg, you didn't know it was Shabbos. You thought it was
Right.
Tuesday, and you went ahead and did something that you would do Tuesday, not Shabbos. So it's the same thing. I mean, you have to be very, very careful. You don't have to scrutinize everybody you meet and find out whether he's a ger or not. That's not the point. Definitely there is an inclination sometimes among people if they encounter a ger and he's not so, that they say, oh, you see, your background is now coming out. That's clearly what the Torah is saying you can't do. You can't sort of put your finger on and say, this is what you were, this is what you are.
So
You
does
have to
this,
take he changed and you have to accept it. Now, but the Gemara is pointing out that even though he changed, there is a background here that may be impossible to totally eradicate, which is why the Torah says so many times you got to look beyond, even if you know what he was, you got to look beyond it.
so does this carry on or it stops with that person? It doesn't go to the next generation.
Oh, but the next generation is already
Born as a Jew, so
as a Jew, right?
But
Assuming that it was a Jewish woman, yeah. In other words, v'haftas hager is to the one who transitioned to become a ger, and so you have to be especially careful. Now, you can't go to someone who's the child of a ger and make fun and say, "Oh, your father was a ger," or your parents were a ger, whatever. That's totally not acceptable. But he isn't a ger. In point of fact, he isn't a ger.
the deficiency that lingers with a gear stops with that person.
That's correct. That's correct. I mean,
Rabbi,
then he's like a Yisrael who you insulted, like anybody like us, right? Anybody who gets
Right.
insulted and oppressed, there's an Isser. You can't do it. Yeah, Michael.
there is how can I say it? There is an elitism, you know. I I I thought the concept is, as you said earlier, once a ger becomes a Jew, you forget about everything previously. However, based on this Gemara, there is a vestige of what you were before. So there is this, by definition, feeling that if you're born a Jew, that you are somewhat better than someone who became a ger, because by definition there was a vestige of some bad habits. Now, on the other hand, a ger may have had no exposure to Yiddishkeit. They may have been raised totally different. They may have come on their own. I know that we are supposed to dissuade them from becoming a Jew, how difficult it is so that we will really know that they're in earnest. But doesn't it say something about us that just because we were born as Jews that there's this aura of I'm a little better than you, that is the oxymoron of what you're supposed to respect a ger for, the fact that they are transformed completely. Now, a Jew, you wipe out their past, yet you have this little shtickle of remnant that's there that is supposedly you're one up on them. It's really hard to reconcile.
It's hard to reconcile. Now, the words of Chazal are Gershin is Gayer, Kekotan Shanola Domi. That a ger who was misgayer properly, he's like a cotton that was born. A cotton that's born of a Jewish mother is a Jew. So we now put the ger on the same level as a Jewish child that's born from his mother. The Torah gives us an admonition. That's what you have to do. But the inclination of people would be, oh, he still has that Goyish feel, or he has something from his past. We have to overcome that. That's why the Torah says so many times, v'hafta sager, because the ger will, by nature, we're human beings. The Rabbi Shalom, it's fine. He's 100%. But to us, there may be a lingering doubt if he's really one of us. Of course, all the psukim say he is, but you can't change human nature, Michael. So
Yeah,
someone
but
might
Rabbi,
say,
this is really problematic because it says by definition you're better than that person. And isn't Hakadosh Baruch Hu the true job, Kaviyachel's the true judge of people, not we, so that we have that feeling? It should be that we respect them on the same level. They don't come with any baggage, with no vestige. They're new. Why should we be thinking in that vein? I mean, it's
because
very
we're,
troublesome.
yeah. Again, we're human and have biases, but I won't use the word better. You use the word better. I would say that it's not a question of being better. It's a question of the Rabbi Shalom, when he gave the Torah, basically he offered the Torah to to all the nations of the world. They could easily have been the same as Klal Yisrael, and by not doing it, he's saying, okay, there's a clear division now between a member of Klal Yisrael and not a member of Klal Yisrael. So you
But
have to look
Rabbi,
at it.
that's a nation. Every person is a person.
Every person's a
You
person,
don't
but if
know anything about Yiddishkeit until you get exposed to it. So somebody of their own volition comes forward and wants to follow the Torah. They didn't know any better. That puts them
right.
in a lower classification. It's just so wrong, where it allows us to think that because we are born a Jew, that by definition, we were luckier. We were more fortunate that we were born that
Yeah.
way. It
Yeah.
doesn't mean we're better, but the connotation that this gives is that we might feel that we're better. We should wipe that out completely, because you talked about selecting it as a nation, but each person has to make that decision for themselves. They may have been born into an environment that's all they knew.
Yeah, yeah. No, I'm not saying this is an easy thing to parse, Michael. That uh, so let's look at it something different. I'll just make a different point. Uh, 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 let's just say a Jew is born a Jew. He eats kashrus. He knows from birth that he has to have kashrus. Okay, fine. It becomes second nature. A non-Jew who's born that way doesn't know from kashrus. So he is imbibed in things that clearly a Jew cannot imbibe. And I actually talked to several people, a gerim, and tried to understand what they're about. I mean, they certainly are gerei tzedek. They did it for the right reasons. But the question is, the fact that in the past you had the temptation of eating or doing things that are contrary to halacha, how does that play out to you going forward now that you're a full-fledged member of Klal Yisrael? Do you even have that temptation? Do you even think about it? Do you think about eating a treifa or all of that? And the answer that I got was, I remember it, but I'm not tempted by it. So it's kind of like Sure, I remember eating treifa. I remember being Michal Shab. I remember all those things, but they don't tempt me anymore because I've turned the page. That's
Hey,
what I've heard that. That's a Ger Tzedek.
and
But
language
Here's,
Rabbi,
can I give you another example?
Yeah.
Okay, so
down
you
on
have somebody who was born Jewish, but they were
briefly.
reformed. So they eat non-kosher, they don't observe Shabbos. And then you have
No,
somebody who was born
bro.
non-Jewish, but they
First thing
grew up in a reform household, believing they were Jewish that
I'll
whole
let
time. And
your own
so they,
do it. You have
so
a
they
left
both have a similar background, but one carries that onus.
leg. So
Yeah,
you want
one carries the imprimatur of being Jewish and one not. And sometimes you have Jews who are worse than Goyim because they do it kind of like intentionally. In your face, I will show you
buy
that
a house.
I'm Jewish and I still do that.
Yes.
Well, David's trying to speak here,
Yeah, David, go ahead.
but he's breaking up a bit, David.
David?
Move your phone a little bit.
In my class. Okay.
He's on the phone. I don't think he's trying to speak.
So, Michael, to your point, this is very complicated. I'm not going to say there's a very straightforward answer here, and that's why these are very difficult. Sometimes you just have to accept what it is without delving into really the detail. The Torah tells us that if a true ger is like a member of Klal Yisrael, but that's in the eyes of the Rabbeinu Shalom. To teach a member of Klal Yisrael that you have to love the ger means that people have to overcome a bias. Let's say 99% of us do. And a small fraction of people says, I can't get over the fact. And I'll give you an extreme example. I'll give you an extreme example. Um, and after the Second World War, there was a lot of sort of, are you a Jew or you're not a Jew, whatever. And there were people who converted to Judaism who oppressed the Jews during the war. So can I ever forgive that? Can I ever say Vahaftas a ger because he's a ger, but look what he did before. He was an oppressor. So it's tough for us to reconcile that. I would not want to be in a position to have to be a judge, what to do. But if you follow the words of the Torah, and Michael, that's tough. I agree with you to say, well, I have to put everything aside and I have to accept him as a member of Klal Yisrael. But don't you have that little nagging feeling that, wait a minute, look what how do I forget? He was the murderer of Jews, so to speak.
What you're really saying here is that the ger has a tough job because he has to wipe away or suppress his years of experience.
Yep.
I mean, and that's not something a Jew ever has to do.
Which is why we always counsel against someone being a ger.
Right, but they have this job, and I
it's
guess
tougher. It's tougher than you and I, for sure.
It's much tougher for them because they can't wipe out the experiences that they had. They just have to re-characterize it in a different way to say that was the old me and I have a new me.
Right.
Now, people go through other changes in life that even Jewish, when somebody gets married, they are changing their whole life situation and it works out. They have to give up being selfish about different things and so on and so forth when you get married. So people are capable of changing their life and not suppressing always, or suppressing in the case of a ger, things that would not be appropriate non-Jewish.
Right.
But it doesn't say that you can wipe it away. You can't. The thing is, the challenge is for other Jews not to think that they haven't wiped it away completely.
And that's why the Gemara says it repeats so many times. So many times.
Right, but when somebody becomes a ger, from what I understand, they're still watched a little bit to see whether they revert back to their old ways.
Yeah. I mean,
sometimes it happens.
Yeah. Look, of course, we always want to be careful that someone, with his best intentions, once he becomes a yid, then he pines for his old life and does things that are improper. But there's no one answer to this. You can't just wrap it up and say, yes, he's a ger, everything's fine, we move on in life. There's always that chiluk, and that's the chiluk that the Rabbanah Shalom made at Har Sinai, that there was those who accepted the Torah. Again, no one was. We were all gerim, gerim yisi. We were all gerim, and that's the final line here that we're going to learn here is that why we have such sensitivity to gerim is because you and I, our ancestors, were all gerim. We were in that position. Okay, we were in that position before Kabbalah Satorah. We were like any other non-Jew. So what does it say about us? So take a look. The Gemara, then the final piece is my diksiv, when the Gemara says v'ger lo soine v'lo silchatzenu. Why don't you oppress? Ki gerim hayisim beretz Mitzrayim. We always come back to that.
But
We were gerim in Mitzrayim. We know what it means to be oppressed as a people. Therefore, you have to have empathy when you deal with other people who are not like you, that you shouldn't oppress, because we were not like the Mitzrayim and they oppressed us.
but that's why we have the mitzvah to us, natural Jews born that way, not to actually take it out on the ger. I mean, why were we given so many commandments about the ger? Because it's hard.
Right.
You have to go against your own nature to suppress what you knew about that person years ago.
Right. And
Otherwise, why do we need the mitzvah if it wasn't
right.
very important for
But Jay, this is a tough mitzvah to fulfill because
Right.
we are human, and because but not the Rabbi Shalom. Rabbi Shalom turns the page, it's over. We can't do that because of who we are. So I'm going to finish this because there's a really beautiful ending to this that everybody sort of knows, but here's the source. So you're not allowed to oppress, okay? Tanina, we learned in the Brisa, Rabbi Nosson says, mum, shebecha al tomer lechavrecha. If you have a mum, a blemish, of some kind of a blemish, then you don't mention it or you don't say it to somebody else. In other words, you suffer from the same thing, so don't bring it up to somebody else, right? So you can't say something when you have something similar that you had in your past, your family, whatever it was. This is what I want to say. This is what people say. It was a popular saying. This kifle zekifa biyaskei. That, and it's a famous Yiddish word, but if someone in your family was hanged, lo ne'melei lechavre zekef binasa. Don't say, hang up this item, clothing or food or whatever it is. In other words, how far is the sensitivity that we have to have is not just treating a ger or treating someone in a proper manner, but being so sensitive that if you know there is a mum, if you know that there's a blemish, that something happened, even though it has nothing to do with this fellow, you can't even mention the words that would allude to what happened, because that would be a sort of a sin against him. Because if you say, hang up your coat, and he had a ancestor who was hung, what, are you going to make an equation? Well, the answer is yes. That using that word, that's what he means, mum. If you have a mum that you have, you shouldn't say it to your fellow man. Or if there was a mum in his past, you shouldn't repeat it, even though it's out of context. There's nothing to do with anything. But that word, that mum, will conjure up all kinds of negative things. So the Gemara says, the Brisa there says, you're not allowed to say it. What do we get from all this? From all of this, we'll wrap it up by saying that Oinos Devarim, we're still talking about Oinos Devarim, sometimes it's inadvertent, sometimes it's not. But look how powerful and how much space is spent in among the Chazal, teaching us that we have to be careful with our words. And in some cases, there's a higher calling, like by a ger. I mean, it's one thing if I say something to you, Jay, and we're both Yidden. Okay, it's terrible. I shouldn't do it. But we're on the same page, so to speak. We're all part of the family. So sometimes in a family, people say things to each other that isn't right. But when it comes to someone who is not in the family, and that's why the Torah says in so many cases, "V'haftas ager," the Rebbe Shalom has a special love for a ger, is because a ger. I mean, think about it. We say this all the time, I'm sure. If I wasn't born Jewish, why would I become Jewish? I'm oppressed. I'm a minority. People spit on me. The tradition of Jews throughout history has been awful. Why do I want that? Why would I bring that down on my family or myself or my family if I didn't have to have it? So the fact that someone says lishma for the right reason, because there's all kinds of gerim which sometimes aren't for the right reason. But if you do it lishma because you got the spark and said, to me, being a Jew is a calling that I want to be part of. And by the way, the Chazal say that I don't know if it's all or most gerim are returning from having been Jewish. What does that mean? Again, I can't speak in too much depth about it, but that there is in your lineage the fact that there was a Jewish spark and it got lost. So a ger is returning, right? He's a stranger, but he's returning to what he had, which he didn't even know he had. That's why they say the pinta yid, that little tip of the yud that's in every Jewish soul, never is eradicated. It's always there, and it lies dormant, and most of the time, or many times, it never sort of resuscitates. But there are times when it comes to life and it resuscitates, either because an event or something happened that opened somebody's eyes. Then that's why the Chazal say you dissuade him many, many times, three at least. You dissuade him from becoming Jewish because you want to sort of test his real mettle, whether he means it, and if he does, and he's emes, then you have to embrace him. So I know, Michael, this is a very tough area, and we can only get him to a certain point because we really don't fully sort of get into why am I lucky and the next guy isn't. Another guy's a goy and I'm a yid. It's if you contemplate that and think about that too much, it's very tough.
Rabbi, I just make one last point, and that
Yeah.
is Baruch Dayan Emes. There is one true judge, and we as people, our religion does not have judgment on this earth. Yes, I mean, in the time of the Sanhedrin, yes, we had a court system. We do have, we have based in today for certain things, but the point is that there are two aspects to this. One is judging someone, and one is interplaying with someone. And so when you start this way, it's like I'm already, and you see this. I mean, people are judging Gerim. Are they really? You have enough trouble with your own self
Right.
to try to maintain your love. You ask, why would someone want to convert to Judaism with all that we have to observe and go through? Because if you love God, you may want to take that on yourself because they understand it's an expression of what God is, either because of what they've seen God do, like in the case of Yisro. It's a matter
But
of,
how many people walking the face of the earth think that way? You're right. But for most people, they didn't even think that way.
yes, but we don't have a right to judge what they're thinking. And what
Right.
this connotes is that you are by definition gonna think that way.
Yes.
It's one thing if you should respect someone who does that. You should not be judging them. You have enough trouble with yourself than
Right.
you have to go out and be judging everybody.
And that's why the sort of the gold standard is to reach that point where you can truly not judge and we are all basar v'dam, we're all human. So our humanity sometimes stands in the way with with what should be the right thing. But we have to overcome that. That's what our obligation is as Jews, is to follow the principles of the Torah. And if the Torah tells us for haftas hager, and you say, but I can't do that, I can't distinguish his background from what he is, then you got to work on yourself. You got to work on yourself.
Exactly. That's where we should be focused on.
Right.
And I know it has to say it 36 or 46 times in the Torah because we're
Because how
wired up to
difficult it
do
is.
that.
How difficult it is
Yeah. But
to do that.
we should if we're truly a
No.
Jew and in the spirit of Hakadosh Baruch Hu, we need to not judge everyone else, and we need to treat them as they are, and not try to put them in different people in different categories. And it's a very slippery slope, Rabbi.
Right. And there's one final line that I will present here, which I think sort of cements everything you said, Michael, is that the Chazal say, Al tidon es chavero ad shetiyeh b'mkomo. You cannot judge your fellow man until you stand in his place, in his shoes. And that really is what we're talking about. How can you or I understand where the ger came from, what he did? So that's it. Altidenus chavero. So human nature, this is tough because that's not human nature. But it is our obligation to perfect ourselves to the point where we don't judge. V'hafta l'reacha kamocha. We don't judge. And we say that I'll take him at face value. He has proven himself. Remember, to become a ger can take quite a long time. So you go through all kinds of sort of trials and tribulations, and you still come out the other end saying, I still want this, I still want this, then you have to accept the fact that the Ribono Shel Olam is truly embracing and allowing that person. And again, I've had some experience with it, and encountering people who wanted to become a ger, or and oftentimes they fall away. More times maybe than not, they fall away because it's one thing to say, I love God and I love the Jewish people and I like the way they service God. This is what I want to do. But when you get into the nitty-gritty, Michael, then like you say, do I really want to do this? I mean, every minute mitzvah, which sometimes doesn't even make sense to many people. Why am I doing this? Because the Torah says so. So you have to be a maimin. And it's hard enough to be a maimin when you're a Jew. How do you become a maimin when you're converting? So anyway, we wrap up this whole fascinating sugya with the point. Again, these are all, each subject is a world unto itself. But with the point we wanted to make is with Oino's Devarim, that how profound it is. And I think that's the point here of all this Gemara, is we have to check ourselves because our speech, right? We say that speech is louder than actions. I mean, you can kill people with speech. I mean, you can with actions too, but speech is that much more powerful. So you have to rise to the level where you completely feel that I can control my speech, not say lashon hara or other things, or say something that you don't mean, but it slights somebody else. You have to think about that. And too often we don't. We just, whatever is on the heart is on the tongue, and we say it. And then we realize, oh my gosh, I shouldn't have said that. So the moral lesson, of course, of all this Gemara is that the Gemara said it many, many times, when all of the Sharei Tefillah were closed and you could no longer reach the Ribono Shel Olam, then the Shar Oino was not closed. So the Ribono Shel Olam will always guard the person who is slighted and punish those who do the avera. So, in any way, that's again fascinating Gemara. This last few blot, and now we have a couple of minutes. We'll turn just to the concept because it's a new Mishnah and a whole new discussion that we're going to go through here at the bottom of Nuntes Omid Beis. So let me just start by saying that we know, the Torah tells us, that a person has to be truthful. person has to say the truth. A person can't deceive somebody else, whether it's in practice or in speech, it doesn't matter. You have to be straightforward. And again, we're going to have a fascinating discussion about this because we have to separate when someone says something that is deceitful and wrong, as opposed to, oh, this looks bad, but it's not deceitful and wrong. And that's, again, we're dealing with very, very tough concepts here because how do you do that? I remember when I started in law school, the very first thing that I heard, I mean, look, a lawyer has to be truthful, has to be honest, et cetera, et cetera. And then for the first time, I heard this concept called puffing. Never heard it in my life. What's puffing? What's meant us puffing? The teretz is that even though, and again, lawyers, okay, they're held to a certain standard, but there are things that they say that aren't. It may not be specifically correct, but it's not wrong. Let me tell you something. I don't know how, that's a tough, tough road to hoe, is to make, and of course in Cloud Yisrael as well. I mean, it works both ways, is that there are things that you say that are not wrong, but you shouldn't say them. Or there are things that you're not allowed to say, and but if you nuance it a little bit, it's okay. That's what this Mishnah and Gemara are going to be about, and I think that we're going to learn some fascinating things about what one might think is an iser and is not an iser. It's merely just what we call it, a white lie. That's the term we use, a white lie? It's a lie nevertheless, so you have to stay away from it. But it doesn't have the same clout of iser. It doesn't have the same negativity than someone who comes out specifically and says something untruthful. So,
Rabbi, it's not only in the law school you learn that. Just look at the what do you call the journalists.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And look, that's
They're
standard.
they're better than the lawyers.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I think when they did a survey, I think journalists came as lower than lawyers in terms of veracity and trustworthiness. So clearly, we're at that point, unfortunately, where we can't trust. Can't trust. Who do you trust? I mean, that's exactly why, if you're dealing in frum circles or you're dealing in Erecha circles, you get back to our discussion. You have to have a certain sort of feeling of trustworthiness that a person who is going to be a maimin is not going to do something wrong, whether it's a convert or a Jew, born a Jew. Is how do you trust someone that what they're saying or doing is correct? I mean, if we don't, then the whole world falls apart because then there's no such thing as full faith. I mean, how do you have to look over your shoulder every single time because you got to worry that what someone's saying isn't true. So at some point, we have to reconcile ourselves and say no, that most people will not intentionally say something that is untrue. And again, we'll see in this Mishnah later in the Gemara that there are shades of that where I said something which, well, is it true or is not true, but it doesn't fall into that category. That's what this Mishnah we'll talk about. We'll start next week and Mitzvah Shem and go through. But I will say again that in the different parts of Shas that I've learned or we've all learned, there is a Gadata of this type that we just completed, which is both fascinating and very difficult to contemplate. So I think all the questions, Michael and everybody else, all the questions that we ask are valid, but how do we really answer them? How can we plumb the depth to understand what the Baruch Shalom wants from us? And at the end of the day, we use our training as Jews to say we want to do the right thing. What is the right thing? Okay, that's what it boils down to. So
we now have a new term called alternate facts.
alternate fact, right?
Yeah, right.
Right. So where do we go? Anyway, terrific shiur, everybody. I think we understand it. At one level, we understand it. At one level, we totally don't understand it. And so we have to have the emunas chachamim. But it does open our eyes to what the Chazal want from us in terms of whether it's dealing with a friend, dealing with a wife, dealing with a business partner, dealing with the ani, even the ani. I mean, we haven't talked too much about it, but the poor person. How do you deal with that? And that's, I think, we'll get into that a little bit next week when it comes to dealing with other people and how we appropriately handle it.
In our neighborhood, we have Gerim and Yoris. So
Yes,
we're fortunate to have the mitzvah to be able, the opportunity,
right,
this mitzvah related to the Yohafta, Seger,
right.
etc.
No, absolutely. And there's, again, I don't want to single out, but there's, when I daven, in my minyan, maybe there's one fellow who's going through the process, and he's been going through this process for quite some time, which is the appropriate way to do it. He can't be makabel the mitzvahs because it's not appropriate for a non-Jew to be makabel the mitzvahs. But at the same time, he begins. In other words, he can be your Shabbos goy for all intents and purposes. But he's going through so that the process, if he's internalizing, he's real, again, I don't know him well, but if he has that real spark that he wants to become a Yid, and he sees all the things he has to go through, and notwithstanding that, he's going to overcome it. That's, a ger is at a pinnacle that none of us can really appreciate.
Right.
We don't have those challenges. We never had them.
No.
So in any event, all right. So sei gesund, and we should Taka have a good week, and the yard sites of Rabbi Hyatt, Rabbi Clavin, all the neshamas should be as chus for Klal Yisrael.
Thank
Thank you.
to everybody.
Yeah.